The haunted shadows. In the heart of the south side of Chicago, there was a street that no one spoke about after dark. Redmond Avenue, as it was known on the map, had a history. Some said it was cursed, that the ghosts of those who had died there, victims of violence, betrayal, and unspeakable injustice, never truly left. It wasn't just the ordinary stories of haunted houses, though. The spirits that roamed Redmond Avenue were vengeful, powerful, and angry haunted who had suffered so much in life that even death couldn't give them peace. They didn't just haunt homes. They haunted people. Jay, a local college student, had heard about the stories from his grandma growing up. She always warned him, don't be messing around near Redmond. You might run into something you can't run from. But like most people his age, he shrugged it off. Ghost stories weren't real, and curses were just old superstitions. One night, Jay and his crew were hanging out looking for something to do. His boy Dre brought up the idea of going to Redmond Avenue. We could hit up that old spot on the corner. People say it's haunted as, You down? Dre asked, smirking as if daring Jay to back down. Jay rolled his eyes. Man, ain't nobody scared of no ghosts. So they grabbed their jackets and headed to the street as night settled in. The air around Redmond was different, though heavy, thick like it was suffocating them. The streetlights flickered, barely illuminating the cracked pavement. Every sound felt amplified. The wind, the rustling leaves, and something else. Something that they couldn't quite place. They reached an old abandoned building at the corner. It had once been a community center, but after a string of violent incidents, it was shut down, left to rot. Dre kicked the door open and they walked in, laughing, daring each other to explore deeper into the place. But as soon as they stepped inside, the laughter died. The air was even heavier, like something was pressing down on them. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of their eyes, but every time they turned, there was nothing there. Y'all feel that? Marcus, the quiet one of the group, finally spoke up. Feel what? Jay asked, though he already knew. There was a coldness creeping up his spine, and it wasn't from the wind. Something was watching them. Suddenly the door slammed shut behind them, and the room grew darker. A deep, low voice echoed through the building, but it wasn't a voice they recognized. It was rough, like gravel, scraping across metal, and it spoke in a whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. Why are you here? The crew froze. Jay's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't see anyone, but the presence in the room was undeniable. Yo, this ain't funny, Dre, Marcus muttered, his voice shaking. But Dre was as pale as the others. That ain't me, man. The shadows began to move again, but this time they didn't stay in the corners. They stretched across the walls, creeping closer and closer until they took shape. Black, faceless figures emerged, their outlines barely visible against the darkness. They weren't ghosts like in the movies. These were different, heavier, more real, like shadows come to life. The figures surrounded them, and the air grew colder. Jay could barely breathe as the whispers grew louder, more distinct. The haunted weren't just specters. They were trapped souls, men who had been gunned down, lynched, murdered without justice. They had been abandoned by life and forgotten in death, and now they were angry. Their rage was palpable, suffocating, and it was directed at anyone foolish enough to trespass on their land. You're gonna end up like us, one of the voices hissed, and suddenly Jay felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down and saw blood, his blood, but there was no wound, no source for the pain. It was like the spirits were feeding off their fear, off their very life force. Panic set in as Jay and his friends tried to run, but the shadows moved faster. They wrapped around their legs, pulling them down, dragging them deeper into the darkness. One by one, his friends disappeared, swallowed by the shadows, their screams echoing in the empty halls. Jay was the last one standing, barely able to move, his body paralyzed with terror. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the cold, glowing eyes of the haunted shadows, filled with hatred and sorrow. The next morning, no one knew what had happened to Jay and his crew. They were never seen again. Redmond Avenue remained as it always had. Silent, cursed, forgotten. And anyone who dared to ask about the haunted who roamed there was met with silence. Because the truth was, once you crossed into their domain, there was no coming back. They weren't just haunting the streets anymore. They haunted the memories of those who stayed behind, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to walk down Redmond Avenue after